Welcome, brave souls, to a night filled with chills and thrills. As the moon rises and shadows dance, gather round as we dive into the spine-tingling tales that haunt the Halloween night. From ghostly apparitions to sinister secrets, these stories will send shivers down your spine. Are you ready to face your fears? Let's begin our journey into the darkness. "I love you, Halloween," I shouted, looking up at the night sky with a big grin. My mom, Mrs. Jane Florence, laughed from the doorway, watching me. We'd just gotten home from trick-or-treating, and my older sister Sabrina was already inside, calling for us to hurry so we could sort out the candy. "Halloween loves you too, sweetie," Mom called, chuckling in her Space Ranger costume. I turned to look at her, beaming, knowing I looked super cool in my zombie makeup. My face was painted ashen white, with dark eye sockets and lips. A little bit of red, like fake blood, was dotted around my mouth, although I kept licking the ketchup off, which was sort of ruining it. "So, are we going to stay out here all night, or do you want some candy?" "Halloween loves you too, sweetie," Mom called, chuckling in her Space Ranger costume. I turned to look at her, beaming, knowing I looked super cool in my zombie makeup. My face was painted ashen white, with dark eye sockets and lips. A little bit of red, like fake blood, was dotted around my mouth, although I kept licking the ketchup off, which was sort of ruining it. "So, are we going to stay out here all night, or do you want some candy?" "Candy!" I shouted, running up the steps, past our pumpkins with their sharp-toothed smiles and witch hats. I had to stop for a second, making sure none of my candy spilled out of my pumpkin basket. That's when I saw him. A weird-looking trick-or-treater on the sidewalk. He was moving in a funny way, reaching his hands out, like he was yanking on an invisible rope. It was a mime, a little one, maybe just a bit taller than me, dressed in black and white stripes with makeup that looked even cooler than mine. It was smooth, with these black lines running down over his eyes. "Happy Halloween," I called, waving. The mime stopped, leaning back at this strange angle, like he was sitting on air, and waved back with a grin. "Look, Mom," I said, chuckling. "It's a real mime." "Oh?" Mom said, peeking out the door. "AW, that's cute." She laughed, but I saw her face change a little, and she looked around, tiny frown forming. "I don't see his parents." The mime started moving again, still pretending to pull himself along with that invisible rope. Mom watched him carefully, her eyes following him as he walked down the street. "They're probably somewhere else," I said, pointing at a family walking up the sidewalk. The parents were dressed as pirates, and their kid wore this big shark costume that was way too big for them. The shark mouth, with its sharp teeth, was way above their head, and they had to be guided along. Mom laughed at that, but I could tell she was still keeping an eye out for the mime, even though he was already gone. "Come on," I said, tugging at her hand. "I want to eat my candy." She sighed, glancing one last time at the family with the shark before smiling back at me. "All right," she said, closing the door. "Looks like you were right." Get over here, you slugs," Sabrina yelled from the kitchen. "You're wasting my candy time." "Candy time, candy time," I chanted, galloping into the kitchen. Sabrina sat at the head of the table, her candy all piled up like it was treasure. She wore her scarecrow costume, with straw sticking out of her sleeves, and her blue jumper. Across the table sat Dad, Mr. Dan Florence, holding my baby sister, Patricia, who was already asleep in her pickle costume. "Harry," Dad called as I ran in. "How much candy did you get?" "A whole lot," I shouted, slamming my pumpkin basket onto the table and bouncing in my chair like an excited puppy. "Oh, I bet," he chuckled, leaning back in his vampire costume, complete with a black suit, a cape, and fake fangs. He laughed like Dracula. "Give all your candy to me, my zombie minion." "Never, you old corpse," I shot back, sitting up straight and pulling my basket closer. "All right, dig in, guys," Mom said, and we all tore into our candy, wrappers flying everywhere as we devoured chocolates, gummies, Twizzlers, and everything else. I could feel my face lighting up with every bite. "Did you see the mime, Dad?" I asked, suddenly remembering. "A mime?" he repeated, raising his eyebrows. "No, but that sounds creepy." "Creepy?" I cried, half laughing, half shocked. "No, I'm the creepy one. Mimes are funny. You are a creep," Sabrina muttered, sticking out her tongue, her whole mouth blue from gum. "It's Halloween. You're supposed to be a creep. Not every costume has to be scary." "Yes, they do," I said, crossing my arms. "And your stupid scarecrow costume isn't scary at all." "Hey," Mom interrupted, giving me a warning look. "Stupid is an ugly word. You don't want to go to bed early, do you?" "No," I said, my tone immediately shifting to me as I turned back to my candy. I could feel Sabrina's smirk behind me, satisfied. "Now, Sabrina, don't tease him," Dan said, and then his voice switched to a Dracula accent. "If you two start arguing, your candy will be all mine." "No," we shrieked in unison. "You can't do that," I insisted, the urgency rising in my voice. Yeah, Sabrina chimed in, her forceful shout making her straw hat fall off, revealing her curly blonde hair. We have rights. The Constitution says so. Oh, not according to the parenting rule book, Dan replied, a sly grin spreading across his face. That book doesn't exist. Sabrina shot back, her eyes wide with disbelief. Yeah, we've never seen it, I added, trying to back her up. Kids aren't allowed to see it, Dan said, still grinning. Article 15, that's a load of baloney, Sabrina exclaimed. Say what you want. Dan shrugged, brushing off our protests. The book is absolute. Well, if you take my candy, I threatened, my heart racing, the Hollow Man will come after you. Oh, who's this Hollow Man? Dan asked, clearly amused. Yeah, tell us about him, Jane encouraged, leaning in closer. I took a deep breath, trying to sound as ominous as possible. He's a ghost. He got grounded for too long and starved to death. Now he follows around bad parents who are mean to their kids. Oh, should I be scared? Dan asked, flashing his fake fangs, trying to keep the mood light. Yes, I said sharply, feeling the seriousness of the moment. He'll follow you to the ends of the earth, and when he finds you, you can't turn your back to him. And what happens if I do turn my back to him? Dan asked, feigning fear. He'll kidnap you. Oh no, that sounds bad. But that's not the worst part, I continued, relishing the suspense. It gets worse, Jane exclaimed, eyes wide with excitement. Much worse. I paused for effect. He'll lock you up in a car, and then he'll give you a fate worse than hell. Oh, what does he do when you're in the car? Jane asked, leaning in even closer, eager for the details. The rest of eternity, I'll have to listen to. I paused, letting the tension build. Country music. How dare you? Sabrina screeched, and our parents doubled over, cackling at our antics. That sounds terrifying, Dan exclaimed, playing along. No it doesn't, Sabrina insisted, defiance in her voice. Country music's great. Country music sucks, I countered, feeling bold. Sabrina grunted, crossing her arms. Your taste sucks. I think you're in the minority here, Sabrina. Jane chuckled. All your tastes suck. I'm the only one in this darn house that knows what good music sounds like. In a fit of frustration, she tossed a dark piece of candy at me. You have to eat the black Twizzler now. You! I cried, swatting it away. It'll give me the plague. What? Dan exclaimed, pretending to be shocked. Black Twizzlers are great. I'll eat it if you don't want it. Well then, get it out of our sight, I shouted, tossing it over to him. Don't mind if I do, Dan said, licking his lips as he undid the wrapper. MHMM, yum. He took a big bite. That's gross, I complained, shaking my head. It's of course he likes his coffee black, Sabrina explained matter-of-factly, as though this were scientific fact. His taste buds died long ago. Ha ha. Dad's taste buds are dead, I laughed. Hey, Dan said, feigning hurt. Uncool. We continued to giggle, digging into our candy, soaking up the last moments of Halloween night. Later, as I lay in bed, nestled against my pillow in ghost pajamas, I felt satisfied. I'd insisted on keeping the zombie makeup on until tomorrow. That was all my parents could do to bribe me not to eat all my candy in one night. As I settled in, wishing for my next Halloween to be even better, I drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, I jolted awake to a rapping sound at my door. Groaning like the zombie I was dressed as, I listened intently. There it was again. 3 curt knocks at my bedroom door. My heart raced as I glanced toward the doorway, a painful sensation tugging at my eyes from being woken so late. Mom, is that you? I called out, my voice hoarse in the silence, but there was no answer. I rolled over with a sigh, convinced it was just a dream. Bang, 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 the knocking returned, louder this time. I sat up, my heart thumping in my chest. That better not be you, Sabrina, I warned, frustration creeping into my voice. You're trying to scare me. I'll tell Dad. He'll take your candy. As I walked closer to the door, a shiver ran down my spine. The room felt unnaturally cold, as if the chill air from outside had crept in. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob, but paused, my fingers resting on the cold steel. My eyes, still adjusting to the darkness, caught sight of the dark shapes around my room. The thought crossed my mind. What if it's a monster? Goose flesh erupted all over my skin. Felt my hair stand up as I stared at the door, my heart thumping harder, my breathing going hoarse. I'm not scared, Sabrina, I lied, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. I waited, 10 seconds, 20, 30, for more knocking, anything, while a cold numbness crept over my hand on the doorknob. Finally, after what felt like an hour, I twisted the knob and opened the door. Oh, it's you. My voice was a mix of surprise and relief. It was the mime, standing there in the hallway, right in front of me. He was my height, wearing oversized, baggy pants that trailed past his feet, and his hair was slicked back over his head, as black as the makeup around his dark eyes. The mime gave me a crescent smile and put a pale finger tipped with a black nail to his lips, a signal to hush. "Why are you here?" I whispered, nodding at him. "And why do you have to knock so loud?" The mime tilted his head and gestured for me to follow, moving toward the kitchen. Leaning out of my room, I watched him drift down the hall. How'd he even get in? I wondered. And why's no one else up? I glanced toward my family's rooms, Sabrina's to the right and my parents and the babies in front of me. Both doors were closed, darkness behind the cracks. Did no one else hear him? Just as I reached for my parents' door, a hand shot out from the darkness and grabbed my wrist. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, something small was tossed into my mouth, and a burst of flavor flooded my throat. It tasted sweet, like chocolate with a crackling intensity that jolted me awake. The best candy I'd ever had. I chewed, savoring the smooth, gummy texture, and looked at the mime, who smiled even wider and held out more candies. I grabbed them, lapping them up for their heavenly taste, and the mime led me down the hall toward the kitchen, swaying like he was on a tightrope. I tried to mimic his movements, giggling, almost tumbling over. The mime caught me, his black lips curling into a silent laugh. He didn't make a single sound as we moved, not even a floorboard creaked under his careful feet. In the kitchen, the mime came to a sudden stop, stumbling backward from the doorway and falling over as though he'd hit an invisible wall. "Wow," I laughed. "You're really good at this." The mime's mouth moved in a silent laugh again, and he got up, not in a normal way but as if he had invisible wires lifting him, his whole body rigid, rotating upward. I clapped awkwardly. It was impressive, but unsettling too. It seemed inhuman, like he'd used magic to levitate. I stopped laughing, a frown creeping over my face. The mime had a strange slouch now, but somehow his eyes were still level with mine, and a thin line of drool hung from his lip. A chill ran down my spine. Something was very wrong here. I knew it, but I couldn't put it into words. Everything felt like a strange dream, just real enough to seem believable. That's when I noticed the front door was wide open, letting all the warmth out. The porch light was off, and outside, all I could see were rustling leaves under a cloudy, moonlit sky. I probably would have noticed it earlier if the house weren't already so cold, but I'd been too distracted by the mime's antics. "Why's the door open?" I asked, a bit uneasy. The mime flashed a sinister frown. "Did you?" Before I could finish, he moved with unnatural speed, putting his face inches from mine. I stared into his cold, dark eyes and saw something wild and feral in them. But then, in an instant, his face brightened, smiling sharply. He gestured toward the kitchen doorway, and, his hand holding mine, I followed, too spooked to pull away. Once we got into the kitchen, the tension eased a little. On the table was a mountain of candy, piled so high I couldn't see the wood underneath. On the counter, a stack of square cardboard cutouts Saturday. The mime picked them up while I gawked at the candy. "See, can I have some?" I asked, looking over at him with a nervous smile. He held up one of the cardboard signs. It read, in big black letters, "Todder." He tossed it behind him, into the sink, and held up the next one. "My name's Samuel. Do you want to be my friend?" I laughed, feeling more at ease. Sure," I said, and Samuel's lips moved in that soundless laugh again. We sat down at the table and dug into the candy. Somehow, it tasted even better than before. It was like eating pure sugar, mixed with the richest tastes and smoothest textures imaginable. The cold that had crept into the house seemed to vanish. This was paradise. I ate and ate. The candy as sweet as the water from a fountain of youth. "It's great, isn't it?" Another of Samuel's signs read, "MHM, I mumbled, stuffing my face with a chocolate bar that was bigger than my hand. "Where do you get all this?" Samuel tossed the previous sign aside and flipped through to another, "The circus." My eyes went wide. "You work at a circus?" Samuel nodded and grabbed 6 jawbreakers from the table, starting to juggle them. They flew up in the air, circling back down in perfect rhythm. I could barely keep track of them in the dark, yet Samuel tossed them up over and over, his skill incredible. For his finale, he threw them all up in the air at once and caught them all in his mouth. I clapped, awed, but my excitement faded as I heard a loud crunch. Samuel was chewing the jawbreakers, all 6 of them, casually, like they were just MMS. I'd need to suck on a jawbreaker for at least 10 minutes before I could even think about chewing on it. I thought, disturbed. How was he doing that? "Do you have parents?" I blurted out. Samuel only smiled, swallowing with an audible gulp, and reached for another sign. In the stillness that followed, the hint of reality returned, the cold and dark creeping back, and the sweetness of the candy began to fade. Samuel held up the next sign, showing it with a grin. "They died in a trapeze accident." Those words sent a wave of fear through me. I swallowed the last bit of candy in my mouth, but suddenly the taste changed, becoming rancid and sour, a flavor so foul it made me gag. Samuel's grin only grew wider. He flipped to another sign, I ran away a few months ago. Ever since, I've been wandering the streets, looking for someone to be my friend. He tossed it aside and held up the next. Someone like you, desperate to escape the sour taste in my mouth. I reached for more candy, stuffing it in, hoping to regain the sweetness. But it only got worse. The texture turned gelatinous, the taste like metallic iron, and it grew warm, unsettlingly warm, like flesh. It tasted like blood. I spat it out, heaving over the table, my eyes wide with horror, my heart pounding. But Samuel didn't react. He just kept eating candy, flipping through his signs as if nothing had happened. Do you know why I ran away? The next sign read. I couldn't look away, trembling with dread and too horrified now even to glance at the candy. No one at the circus liked my voice, except the clown, Mr. K. Samuel's next sign read. He was my only friend. He flipped to another. He taught me to always smile, but he left to perform other shows. He's good with disguises, so I haven't been able to find him. Samuel discarded that sign, reaching for a gumball from the pile of candy. He held it out to me, and, hesitantly, I took it. The taste was even worse. It was cold, slimy, and oddly salty. I'd expected it to be hard, but it was squishy, more like a grape. I spat it out instantly, falling off my chair with a gasp. Mom, Dad, help, help me. As I cried out, the candy rolled in front of me, and my heart froze. It was a raw, human eyeball, green like my mother. I screamed, my voice high-pitched and broken. Above me, Samuel stood holding another sign, and something else in his left hand, something meaty. But I was too busy screaming to look closely. There was a sickening crunch, and a wet, soft object landed on my side. I looked down, horrified, and felt a scream bubble up from deep within. It was a half-eaten hand, blood dripping over my arm, pooling beneath Samuel's twisted smile. Samuel towered over me, easily over 5 feet now, and held up another sign. If you want to be my friend, you have to hear my voice. He tossed it aside as I crawled backward, too terrified to take my eyes off him. Another sign read, do you want to hear my voice? No, I screamed, tears streaming down my face. No? Go away. Samuel's smile turned into a frown. He threw the sign at my head, hitting me with a shocking force that left me flat on my back, clutching my forehead. Another sign dropped in front of my eyes. Do you want to hear my voice? Stop. I begged. Another sign struck my face. Do you want to hear my voice? Go away. Go away. I cried, blood trickling down where the signs had hit me. I braced myself, expecting the next strike. I squeezed shut, but instead, there was silence, and a warm liquid seeped over my hands, dripping through my fingers. Oh, no, 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 I whispered in horror. I pulled my hands away to see Samuel's face inches from mine, his mouth open, dark blood dripping down. His eyes were hollow like empty marbles, his jaw unhinged like a snake's, revealing rows of sharp teeth hidden behind the normal ones. A low rumble escaped his throat, and then, he roared, deep and otherworldly, the sound echoing through me. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire, stabbed by needles. The roar lasted only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. Then, my eardrums burst, and blood poured from my ears, leaving only a high-pitched ringing as I staggered back. Reeling in agony, I scrambled to my feet, stumbling down the hallway toward my parents' room, vision spinning. I threw open the door, but the room was empty. There was no sign of anyone ever sleeping there, and baby Patricia's crib was empty too. I called for them, blood dripping down my face, but there was no response. I couldn't even hear my own voice. I turned, running to my sister's room, but froze in the doorway. Inside, everything was destroyed. Blood and scratches covered the walls, the floorboards torn up, Sabrina's dolls shattered and broken. Her bed was shredded, feathers and dark blood mixing in heaps on her sheets. No, 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 I muttered, words spilling out without sound, only that cursed ringing filling my ears. I turned to flee the house, but the mine was in my way, leaning close, face level with mine. I watched in horror as it crumpled, convulsing, grabbing at its throat as though choking. Its eyes bulged as if about to burst. Carefully, I edged around it, keeping one eye on the door. But just as I was about to escape, the mime spat something out, rose again in that unnatural way, and dangled it in front of me with a sinister grin. It was a clump of golden brown hair, Sabrina's. With a choked gasp, I bolted for the front door. With each step, the words echoed in my head, this isn't real, this has to be a dream. But the door was shut tight, locked. I twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Why? 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 My mind raced in panic, realizing the hopelessness of my situation. I was trapped. Am I going to die? I turned back, and there, from the darkness, the mime loomed closer, stepping out of the shadows. It stomped toward me, swinging its arms like a parade dancer, now towering over me at a height of at least 7 feet. Its eyes were gone, replaced by black voids that seemed to drip from its sockets over a thin crescent smile lined with needle-sharp teeth. With what little strength I had left, I ran. My heart surged with fear as if it had been shocked back to life, Pain radiated through my body with each step. Each breath was an unsteady gasp, leaving me doubled over, choking as I dashed. I stumbled back into the kitchen, moving toward the basement door, the only place to go now, the only place to hope. The door flew open, and I plunged down the stairs, and that was when I saw them, my family, or what was left of them. The sight hit me like a blow, and my knees gave way, sending me tumbling down the last few steps, numb to the pain as my arm snapped against the stairs and my face crashed onto the carpeted floor. I couldn't move. I didn't even want to. My parents were slumped on the couch, beside headless Sabrina, with pieces of Patricia's tiny pickle costume resting in their laps. Torn flesh spilled from the fabric, and their faces were gone. The rest of their skin had been peeled back, exposing raw muscle and bone, and knives stuck out of their empty eye sockets, pinning their heads to the blood-soaked couch. What was once brown was now dark, almost black, the cushion saturated with blood. Pieces of them, fingers, limbs, littered the basement floor, forming a scene so violently grotesque that I could barely process it. Curled on the floor, I vomited up a stream of black bile mixed with chunks of blood and flesh I'd been forced to eat earlier. The agony was searing, relentless. I sobbed, screamed, until my voice wore to a rasp and blood filled my throat. But I couldn't hear a thing. Then, I felt a vibration behind me and turned. The mime's eyeless face loomed, sneering down at me with malevolent glee. Its body lay in a twisted heap, neck bent at an unnatural angle. It stayed there, staring, then rose. Its features distorted grotesquely as tumors erupted across its head, and thin, spiny arms burst from its palms, each tipped with spear-like points. Its legs contorted into muscular, spine-covered limbs. Its striped shirt seemed to melt into its body, becoming one with the monstrous form. Finally, its mouth unhinged wide enough to swallow a watermelon, revealing black gums lined with razor-sharp teeth. I closed my eyes, accepting what was coming. Surprisingly, I wasn't scared anymore. There was an odd sense of peace, knowing that this nightmare would finally be over. It's over, I thought. I just wish. My last tears traced down my cheeks. I wish I could see them all again. I braced myself, feeling my body lifted, ready to be devoured. Monster's snake-like grin spread wider as it claimed me. Deep in the sewers, it sat, a shadowy figure picking at a pouch below its chest. Pried it open with spear-like claws, lifting a ragged piece of skin. I could almost feel it. My face, stretched in a frozen grimace of agony. "Mr. K would like this," it murmured, leaning back against the damp wall with a contented sigh. A hideous, scraping chuckle escaped it as it draped the skin over its deformed head. "I love you, Halloween. Thank you for joining me on this haunting journey through the shadows. If these tales sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite scary story in the comments below. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked, because you never know what might be lurking in the dark. Happy Halloween.